Imagine stepping into an ancient society where, well, everything in life, what you ate, how you handled disagreements, even your health was shaped by this really deep, detailed code.
Yeah, not just suggestions, right?
Hmm.
But a fundamental blueprint for an entire community.
Exactly. And today we're doing a deep dive into one of the most foundational texts behind that code, the Book of Leviticus.
hmm Now, for a lot of people, it can seem, just like a dense list of rules, very specific rules.
Right.
But when you really unpack it, what you find is this incredibly intricate system. It's all designed to create this profound sense of holiness, of distinction and order for a specific people.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We want to explore all these different commands given to the ancient Israelites, supposedly through Moses.
From the really complex sacrificial rituals to, maybe surprisingly, social guidelines and even health regulations.
Yeah. We'll try to figure out how these rules were meant to set them apart, draw them closer to this idea of a sacred way of life, hopefully uncover some aha moments about their day-to-day existence.
At its heart, Leviticus is really about defining holiness and maintaining it. It's not abstract. It's a practical guide for how to exist as a people set apart, reflecting the nature of their God.
Okay, so a huge part of being set apart was this elaborate system of offerings and atonement. Let's maybe break down the different kinds of offerings first, because they seem to say a lot about how they understood sin and forgiveness.
Oh, absolutely. Connection to the divine, too. We see about 5 main types, each with a pretty distinct purpose.
Okay.
So first you have the burnt offering. This one was entirely voluntary.
Voluntary, okay.
Yeah. It involved a male animal, no blemishes could be from the herd, the flock, even birds. And its purpose, to create a sweet savor unto the Lord, and critically, to make atonement.
A sweet savor, like a pleasing aroma.
Exactly. It wasn't just about, calming down an angry God. It was framed more as this act of connection, almost a mutual delight between God and the person offering, signaling a desired relationship.
That's a different way of looking at it. Okay, what else?
Then there are the grain offerings, sometimes called meat offerings in older translations, but confusingly, they're completely plant-based.
Right, flour and oil.
Fine flour, oil, frankincense, could be baked, could be first fruits. The goal here was also that sweet savor and serving as a memorial. And interestingly, no leaven, no honey, always salt.
Why no leaven or honey?
Well, they both cause fermentation, decay, right? So excluding them while requiring salt, a preservative, seems to point towards purity, permanence, incorruption. That kind of sets these offerings apart, emphasizing the enduring nature of their covenant.
Okay, makes sense. What's next?
Peace offerings, also voluntary. Could be male or female, herd or flock, usually offered for Thanksgiving or fulfilling a vow, or just as a free will offering.
And these were often shared, weren't they?
Yes, exactly. Signifying community, fellowship with God, peace.
Right. So then we get to the offerings for, well, when things went wrong.
Right, the sin offering. This was specifically for unintentional sins, things done out of ignorance or maybe oversight.
And the animal depended on who sinned.
That's right. It varied based on status. A young bullock for the high priest, or the whole congregation, which is significant. Then maybe a male goat for a ruler, down to a female goat or lamb for just a regular person.
So status mattered in terms of the offering
It's-
required.
Definitely. It suggests a kind of hierarchy of responsibility.
Yeah.
Those with more influence had a heavier obligation, you could say.
Interesting. And the last one.
The trespass offering. This was for more specific sins, like offenses against holy things or dishonesty, false oaths. Required a ram, no blemishes.
And this one involved restitution too, right?
Yes, that's key. You had to restore the value of what was harmed, plus add an extra fifth. So it wasn't just about ritual cleansing. It was about making things right, materially. Justice.
Okay, so 5 types. But across these were there common steps, common ritual elements. They seem quite structured.
Oh, very consistent patterns. You almost always see the person laying their hands on the offering's head.
Symbolizing.
A transfer. Transferring identity or maybe guilt from per person to the animal. Then the animal was killed before the Lord.
And the blood, that seems crucial.
Absolutely central. How it was handled, sprinkled around the altar, poured at the base, specific rules for sin offerings was meticulous. It connects to that core belief, the life of the flesh is in the blood, and blood was the agent of atonement.
Right. And then the burning of specific parts on the altar, the fat, kidneys, the rump for sheep, and washing the insides. It feels very precise.
It was all part of making it a fire offering of a pleasing aroma to the Lord. That phrase just
Um,
pops up again and again.
a pleasing aroma, like God accepting it.
Exactly. It's metaphorical, obviously, but it signifies acceptance, delight, that the offering worked, basically, restored the relationship.
And the priests, Aaron's sons, they were involved in every step, handling the blood, the fire.
Integral, yes. And they weren't just, facilitating. They received specific portions from these offerings as their sustenance.
What did they get?
Things like the rest of the grain offerings, the wave breast and heave shoulder from peace offerings. That was their due.
But there were limits.
Oh, yes, strict rules. Grain offerings made by priests, or for priests, had to be totally burnt, not eaten. Same for sin offerings. If the blood was taken into the holy place, those were burnt outside the camp.
Why the difference?
It seems to underscore different levels of holiness, proximity to the divine, but other sin and trespass offerings, those were eaten by the male priests, but only in a holy place.
Okay, this is incredibly detailed. Now, maybe the most significant ritual of all, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. It sounds like a huge deal.
It was the pinnacle, really. An annual event, 10th day of the 7th month, a unique day where only the high priest, Aaron, could go into the Holy of Holies, behind the veil.
And he had to wear special clothes.
Yes, simple linen garments, not his usual ornate robes. It emphasized humility, purity, for this incredibly sacred moment.
What were the offerings that day?
Pretty substantial. A bullock for the high priest's own sin offering, he had to be purified first. Then for the whole congregation, 2 goats and a ram.
2 goats. Why 2?
This is where the symbolism gets really powerful. They cast lots. 1 goat was chosen for the Lord, that one was sacrificed as a sin offering.
And the other?
The other was for Azazel, the
Oh, the
scapegoat.
scapegoat. I've heard that term.
This is where it comes from. Aaron would lay both hands on the live goat's head, confess all the sins, the transgressions of all the Israelites, symbolically putting them onto the goat.
Wow.
Then a designated person led the goat away, deep into the wilderness, to an uninhabited place and released it. It literally carried their sins away.
That's such a vivid image, a physical representation of sin being removed.
Exactly. For people who experience divine realities through physical actions, this was incredibly potent. It offered immense psychological, spiritual relief. Your burdens were literally walked away.
And the blood ritual that day, also specific.
Very precise. The high priest sprinkled the blood from the bullock and the sacrificed goat onto the mercy seat and in front of it 7 times. This atoned not just for the people, but for the holy place itself, the tabernacle, the altar, purifying everything.
And the people's role.
They had to afflict their souls, often interpreted as fasting, and do absolutely no work. A solemn day of national repentance, cleansing, and reset.
Okay, so that sacrificial system was like the core, handling atonement, access. But you said holiness was meant to permeate everything. How did that work in, everyday life? Food, health.
Right. This is where holiness gets intensely practical. It shaped absolutely everything. Take the dietary laws, for example. The famous clean versus unclean animals.
Kashrut.
These weren't just about health, though that might have been a side benefit. They were a constant daily reminder of their distinct identity. Every meal became an act of conscious separation. It turned eating into, a spiritual discipline, setting them apart from everyone around them.
So, specific rules, land animals needed a split hoof and had to chew the cud.
Yep. So cattle, sheep, goats in, things like camels, rabbits, pigs out.
And for fish?
Simple.
Yeah.
Fins and scales. If it had both, okay. If not, considered an abomination.
Birds had a list too.
A specific list of forbidden birds, mostly predators or scavengers, eagles, vultures, owls. Bats, too, interestingly grouped with birds here.
And creepy crawlies.
Mostly forbidden and abomination. But a curious exception for certain flying insects that hop locusts, certain grasshoppers, those were actually okay.
Weird. Okay, so beyond what they ate, some things were just off limits entirely.
Yes. Animal fat, specifically from oxen, sheep, or goats, was forbidden. And absolutely no consuming blood.
Because the life is in the blood.
Exactly. The text explicitly says that. Blood was for atonement on the altar, not for eating. Also, touching or eating animals that died on their own or were killed by other animals made you unclean. It's all about maintaining these boundaries. If you're holy, what you consume, you touch, has to align.
So it bleeds, no pun intended, into human conditions of uncleanness.
Right, and some of these are quite detailed. Childbirth, for instance.
Yeah.
It initiated a period of ritual uncleanness. Longer for a girl than a boy, interestingly.
What?
The text doesn't explicitly say why the duration differs, but the process involved purification rituals and offerings before the woman could re-enter sacred spaces. It wasn't a moral judgment on birth itself, but perhaps recognized the profound mystery surrounding life and blood, requiring a reconsecration.
Okay. Then there's the big one, leprosy, which wasn't just leprosy as we know it today, right?
Correct.
Yep.
It likely covered a range of serious skin diseases. The priest acted almost like a diagnostician.
How so?
They had to examine skin eruptions, scabs, spots, look for specific signs. White hair in the lesion spreading, being deeper than the skin, raw flesh, if diagnosed as unclean,
Then what? Total isolation.
pretty much. The person had to tear their clothes, let their hair hang loose, cover their upper lip, and shout, "Unclean, unclean," wherever they went, and live alone outside the camp.
Wow, that's intense social and spiritual isolation. Protect the community, I guess.
Both physically and ritually, yes. But there was a path back. The cleansing ritual for someone healed from this was incredibly elaborate.
Tell me about that.
Involved 2 clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, hyssop, running water. One bird was killed over the water. The living bird, along with the wood, yarn, and hyssop, was dipped in the blood and water mix. The person was sprinkled 7 times, and then the living bird was released into the open field.
Symbolizing.
Freedom. Released from that state of death-like isolation back into life and community. But it didn't end there. Extensive shaving, all hair washing clothes, bathing. Then more offerings. Trespass, sin, burnt offerings. And a fascinating ritual where blood and oil were applied to the person's right earlobe, right thumb, and right big toe.
Reconsecrating their hearing, their actions, their walk.
That's a common interpretation, yes. A full restoration.
Okay. What about other bodily conditions, like running issues?
Yes, that covers various bodily discharges, male and female, including seminal emissions and menstruation. These also cause temporary uncleanness.
To the person and things they touched.
Exactly. Beds, chairs, clothes, vessels they touched became unclean. Cleansing involved washing, bathing in running water, sometimes waiting until evening, and specific offerings after longer periods. The whole system really emphasizes that maintaining ritual purity was essential for the community's sanctity, especially with a tabernacle in their midst.
And it wasn't just people. Objects could become unclean too. Houses.
Right. Touching carcasses, as we mentioned, made you unclean until evening, required washing clothes. If an unclean carcass touched, say, an earthen pot, the pot had to be broken. Wooden items, clothes, leather, those could be washed. Ovens, ranges, if contaminated, had to be broken.
But not wells or cisterns.
Interestingly, no. A spring or cistern with a large volume of water remained clean, maybe pointing to the purifying nature of living or abundant water.
Okay, house leprosy. That sounds strange. Green or reddish streaks in the walls, like mold.
Possibly mold or some kind of mineral efflorescence. If a homeowner saw something suspicious, they told the priest. The priest ordered the house emptied before he inspected, so the contents wouldn't automatically become unclean if he declared the house afflicted.
Smart.
Then he'd examine it. If it looked like the plague, he'd shut the house up for 7 days,
And then.
re-inspect. If it had spread, they had to remove the affected stones, scrape the inside walls of the house, and dump all the dust and stones outside the city in an unclean place. Then repair it with new stones and plaster.
What if it came back?
If the plague returned after repairs, the house was declared unclean. It had to be completely demolished, timber, stones, plaster, everything, and hauled to the unclean place outside the city. Irredeemable.
Wow. But if it didn't come back after repairs?
Then the house was declared clean. And there was an atonement ritual for the house, similar to the one for leprosy cleansing, using the 2 birds, cedar, scarlet, and hyssop.
It really shows how seriously they took this idea of purity extending to the whole living environment. The home itself was part of that sacred space.
Absolutely. Holiness wasn't just for the tabernacle. It was meant to define their entire existence.
Okay, so we have the rituals, the purity rules.
Yeah.
But how did this idea of holiness translate into, how people treated each other? Day-to-day ethics and social life. Leviticus talks about that too, right?
Oh, definitely. It lays out a really powerful moral and social code. And the foundation for all of it is stated very clearly. Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy.
So their ethics flowed directly from God's character.
Precisely. It wasn't just a set of rules pulled out of thin air. It was about reflecting the divine nature in their community life. Observing God's judgments and statutes was the path to holiness.
And that means very practical things like respecting parents, keeping the Sabbaths, but also really strong commands against stealing, lying, fraud.
Yeah, and specifics like not holding on to a worker's wages overnight. That's direct economic justice.
Right. And don't curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind. Real concern for the vulnerable.
And fairness in judgment. No favoring the poor or honoring the powerful. Just judge your neighbor righteously.
How about community relationships? Getting along.
Clear rules there, too. No spreading gossip, no tale-bearing. Rebuke your neighbor honestly if they're doing wrong, but don't harbor hatred in your heart. Don't seek revenge or hold a grudge.
And then the big one.
Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. It's right there in Leviticus, a cornerstone command.
That's incredible. And how did this apply to outsiders, to strangers?
And that's another really striking part. They were explicitly commanded not to mistreat or oppress foreigners living among them.
Why?
The text give the reason. For ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. Their own history of being vulnerable outsiders was the basis for radical hospitality. They were to treat the stranger as native-born and love him as thyself.
Wow. And use fair weights and measures for everyone, foreigner included.
Yes, justice was meant to be universal within their community. Also, simple respect for elders. Rise up before the hoary head and honor the old man. Clear social expectations.
Now, the rules around sexual ethics seem very detailed and carry heavy consequences.
They do. There's a long list of forbidden relationships, mostly centered around preventing incest. Mother, stepmother, sister, half-sister, granddaughter, aunts, daughter-in-law, sister-in-law.
Though there was that exception for marrying a brother's widow, right? Levirate marriage.
That concept appears elsewhere in the law, yes. It highlights how specific laws could interact, balancing broad prohibitions with particular societal needs, like continuing a family line. Leviticus also forbids relationships like marry a woman and her daughter, or two sisters while the first is alive.
And specific sexual acts were forbidden too, called abominations.
Yes, adultery, sex with a woman during her menstrual period, male homosexual acts, bestiality. These were seen as profoundly disrupting the created order and community purity, often carrying the penalty of being cut off or death.
And child prostitution was also forbidden.
Explicitly prohibited. Protecting children and the sanctity of family life was crucial.
Okay, what about other forbidden practices, like idolatry?
Absolutely central. No turning to idols. No making molten gods. A huge prohibition against sacrificing children to the god Molech, a practice of neighboring cultures that was utterly condemned.
What else? Magic. Fortune-telling.
Forbidden. No sorcery, no observing times, like astrology, no consulting mediums or spiritists. Seeking power or knowledge outside of their God was seen as a betrayal of the covenant.
And things like cutting yourself for the dead. Or tattoos.
Also prohibited, no making cuttings in flesh for the dead or printing marks, likely connected to pagan mourning rituals or cultic practices they were supposed to avoid.
Even rules about mixing things, like cattle breeds, seeds, or fabrics.
Yes, no mixed breeding of cattle, sowing different kinds of seed in the same field, or wearing clothing made of both linen and wool, shatnez. The reasons aren't fully spelled out, but it seems tied to maintaining the distinct orders of creation established by God. Separation and distinction are recurring themes.
And the consequences for breaking these rules weren't just about needing another sacrifice, were they?
No, often much more severe. For many offenses, illicit sacrifices, eating blood or fat, major sexual sins, child sacrifice, consulting spirits, the penalty was being cut off from among their people.
Which could mean exile or even death.
It likely encompassed both, depending on the context and severity. Some offenses mandated death explicitly, often by stoning, blaspheming God's name, sacrificing to Molech, being a medium or spiritist.
And the severe sexual sins?
Adultery, various forms of incest, homosexuality, bestiality often carried the death penalty, sometimes specified as burning or stoning. And for physical injury, the principle was eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, proportional justice, lex talionis.
Okay, so we've covered the spiritual, the purity, the social, and moral. But Leviticus even gets into economics and time cycles, especially about the land.
Yes. It's remarkably holistic. It addresses economic justice and temporal cycles in ways that feel surprisingly relevant, actually. Take the land Sabbath.
The sabbatical year.
Exactly. Every seventh year, the land itself got a rest. No sowing crops, no churning vineyards.
So what did people eat?
Whatever grew on its own, the volunteer crops, was available for everyone. The landowner, servants, hired hands, visiting strangers, even the cattle and wild animals. It was a communal provision.
That must have required incredible trust.
Absolutely. Trust that God would provide enough in the sixth year to carry them through the seventh and into the eighth. It powerfully reinforced the idea that the land wasn't ultimately theirs. It belonged to God, and they were stewards.
And building on that was the year of Jubilee.
Yes, happening after 7 cycles of 7 years, so the 50th year. proclaimed on the Day of Atonement with the blast of a trumpet,
And his main idea was,
proclaimed liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It was a radical reset.
liberty how?
Primarily, ancestral land that had been sold reverted back to its original family owners. Every person returned to their family property and their clan. It was a mechanism to prevent permanent landlessness and the concentration of wealth over generations.
So you couldn't sell land permanently.
Correct. Because, as the text says, the land is mine. God's ownership was paramount. So when land was sold, the price was calculated based on the number of harvests remaining until the next Jubilee. It was more like leasing the land's produce for a set time.
What about houses?
Different rules. Houses in walled cities could be redeemed within a year of sale. If not, the sale became permanent. But houses in unwalled villages were treated like fields redeemable anytime and returned at Jubilee. And houses owned by Levites were always redeemable and returned.
It's a really comprehensive system for economic equity built on theology.
It truly is. It aimed to ensure the land provided for all families across generations.
And how did this Jubilee principle affect things like debt and servitude?
Significantly.
Mm.
First, charging interest usury to a fellow Israelite was forbidden.
Really? No interest loans?
Between Israelites, yes. If someone fell into poverty and had to sell themselves into service to a fellow Israelite.
Which sounds like indentured servitude.
Sort of. But they were explicitly not to be treated as bondservants, ruled over with rigor. They were to be treated like hired servants or temporary residents. And crucially, they and their children were automatically released at the year of Jubilee to return to their family and property.
So no permanent enslavement of fellow Israelites.
That was the ideal. Now, they could acquire permanent bondmen and bondmaids from surrounding nations or from foreigners living among them. That was permitted.
What if an Israelite sold himself to a wealthy foreigner living in Israel?
He still had the right of redemption. A relative could buy him back, or if he prospered, he could redeem himself. The redemption price was calculated based on the years remaining until the Jubilee, treating his service like that of a hired hand. Again, the Jubilee cycle provided an ultimate backstop against permanent servitude even in that situation.
It really paints a picture of a society striving for a unique kind of internal justice. Okay, so this whole system, rituals, purity, ethics, land laws, it all sounds incredibly demanding. And Leviticus is very clear about the stakes, right? This covenant came with consequences.
Extremely clear. Blessings for obedience, curses for disobedience, laid out in stark detail.
What were the promised blessings?
If they walked in God's statutes and kept his commands, things like timely rain, fruitful land, abundant harvests, so much so that threshing would overlap with the grape harvest. Plenty of food, security, peace in the land, no fear. God would rid the land of dangerous beasts and protect them from war.
Victory over enemies, too.
Yes, dramatic victory. 5 of you shall chase 100. God promised to look upon them with favor, make them fruitful, multiply them, establish his covenant, and even dwell among them in his tabernacle, a promise of intimate presence and national flourishing. I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people.
But the flip side, the curses for disobedience.
They are equally intense, designed to be a powerful deterrent. If they despised God's statutes, abhorred his judgments, broke the covenant, the consequences were severe.
Like what?
Sudden terror, diseases like consumption and burning fever, failed crops, eaten by enemies, defeat in battle, being ruled by those who hate them, constant fear and fleeing even when no one pursues.
And it could get worse.
Oh, yes. The text describes escalating punishments if they persist in disobedience. 7 times more punishment for their sins. Pride broken, the sky like iron, the earth like bronze, utter agricultural failure.
That sounds devastating.
It continues. Wild animals attacking their children and livestock, roads becoming deserted. If they still wouldn't listen, then plague, famine, siege. The staff of bread, broken, meaning severe rationing, eating, but never being satisfied.
And the most horrific part.
The warning that conditions could become so desperate they would resort to cannibalism, eating the flesh of their own children. Utter horror and desperation.
Just devastating. And national consequences, too.
Complete destruction. High places and idols destroyed. Cities laid waste. Sanctuaries made desolate. God turning his face away. The land itself becoming so desolate that even their enemies settling there would be appalled. And the people scattered among the nations, living in constant fear, dwindling away in enemy lands. The land itself finally getting its rest, its Sabbaths, while they are in exile.
It paints a picture of total covenant failure. Is there any hope offered amidst all that doom?
There is. Towards the end of that section, there's a crucial turn. If, in the land of their enemies, they finally confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their ancestors, If they humble themselves and accept their punishment,
Then what?
then God says he will remember his covenant with Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. He will remember the land. Even in their punishment, he promises he will not completely reject them or break his covenant. There's a path back, rooted in confession, humility, and God's faithfulness to his promises.
That element of hope, even after such dire warnings, is pretty significant. Okay, one last major section in Leviticus deals with vows, valuations, and other sacred offerings. This seems more like administrative detail almost.
It might seem that way, but it's still deeply tied to dedicating things and even people to God and how that worked practically, often involving specific monetary values, like a divinely regulated system for pledges and contributions.
So you could vow a person to the Lord. How did that work?
Yes, and there was a set valuation scale in silver shekels based on age and sex. For instance, a working-age male, 20 to 60, was valued at 50 shekels, a female at 30. Different values for children and the elderly.
What if someone made a vow but couldn't afford the set value?
Then the priest would assess their ability to pay and set a value accordingly. So there was some flexibility based on means, compassion built in.
Okay, what about vowing animals?
You vowed a clean animal, one suitable for sacrifice, it became holy. You couldn't substitute it or swap it for a worse or a better one. If you tried, both animals became holy.
And unclean animals, like a donkey.
Those couldn't be sacrificed, so they were valued by the priest. The person who vowed it could redeem it by paying the value, plus an extra fifth. If not redeemed, it likely went to the priests and firstborn male animals. You couldn't vow them because they already belonged to God by default.
Right. What about property? Houses or fields?
Similar principle. A house vowed to the Lord was valued by the priest. The owner could redeem it by paying the value plus a fifth.
And fields? That seems complicated with the Jubilee year.
It was. A field's valuation was based on the amount of seed needed to sow it. A.g., a homer of barley feed capacity was valued at 50 shekels for the full period until Jubilee. If vowed partway through a cycle, the value was prorated based on the remaining years. Again, redeemable by adding a fifth.
What if it wasn't redeemed?
If it wasn't redeemed, or if the person who vowed it sold it to someone else after vowing it, it became permanently holy property, reverting to the priests at the Jubilee. It couldn't go back to the original family.
Okay. Then there's this term devoted things, harem. That sounds serious.
Extremely serious. These were things irrevocably devoted to the Lord, often for destruction. They were considered most holy and could not be sold or redeemed under any circumstances.
Even people could be devoted.
The text mentions that no devoted person who shall be devoted from among men shall be redeemed, but shall surely be put to death. This likely referred to specific contexts, perhaps certain enemies under a ban in holy war, or individuals guilty of capital offenses directly against God. It was the ultimate irreversible consecration or condemnation.
Okay, very intense. Lastly, tithes.
Yes, the principle of the tithe is reinforced. A tenth of everything from the land seed, fruit, and every 10th animal that passed under the shepherd's rod from the herd or flock was holy unto the Lord.
Could tithes be redeemed?
Yes, the agricultural tithes could be redeemed by adding a fifth to their value. But for the animal tithe, you couldn't pick and choose. The 10th animal couldn't swap a good one for a bad one, or vice versa. If you did, both became holy. It emphasized giving faithfully what was due to God.
Wow. Okay, that really covers a huge amount of ground. What a journey through Leviticus. From these deeply symbolic sacrifices and atonement rituals
To the really practical everyday rhythms of clean and unclean dietary laws, health regulations.
and then that powerful social, ethical, and even economic code underlying it all.
Yeah, what's truly striking when you lay it all out is just the sheer level of detail and that constant driving emphasis on distinguishing holy from unholy, clean from unclean.
It really gives you a profound sense of how, for them, every single part of life, even things we'd see as totally mundane, was woven into their understanding of God, their covenant.
Absolutely. It was all aimed at living in a way that reflected the holiness of the God they served and maintaining the integrity of that special relationship.
So as you, our listener, reflect on this ancient blueprint for holiness, maybe consider this. What modern ideas of purity or justice or community echoes some of these ancient concerns, even if the form is totally different? And how do societies today, maybe without such explicit divine codes, decide what makes something or someone truly set apart, special, or even holy?